I was originally the most enchanting courtesan at the WanYue Pavilion. Sent to the palace by Xiao Che, I became his father's favorite consort. Once Xiao Che ascended the throne, his first act was to bring me into his harem. The world said he cherished me immensely. But every night, I would crawl at his feet and beg, "Please, let me leave the palace." In the dark room, the long whip in his hand looped twice around my neck, grinding his teeth as he questioned if I had a heart. Ding! RoyalStory reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. When Xiao Che stepped into the Changlu Hall, a jade ruby fell squarely at his feet. Ignoring it, he stepped over the shattered remains and presented a box of pearls before me. "This year's tributes have just arrived. I thought you'd like them, so I picked out the best to bring to you myself." His face was calm and handsome, without a single flaw. It was really hard to reconcile this face with the menacing look he had last night when he found me trying to escape and whipped me in the dark room. I raised my hand and knocked over the pearls. "Your Majesty's acting skills surpass those of the best performers in the Pear Garden by 100-fold. Everyone in the hall turned pale and knelt down, pleading loudly for His Majesty's mercy. I propped myself up and leaned into his ear, provoking him. "Had I known today would come, I should have watched you get stabbed to death back then." Xiao Che looked down at me icily, his eyes as cold as ice. "Consort Xiao, for disregarding palace rules and disrespecting your superior, you're confined to Changlu Hall." When I first met Xiao Che, he was a prince being chased, and I was a prostitute sold into a brothel after my family's fall. Back then, I had just entered the brothel and was unwilling to submit to the madam's training. In the freezing midwinter, a bucket of cold water was dumped over my head, and the keeper threw me into the woodshed. In no time, my hair and clothes were stiff with cold, and by the latter half of the night, my body was burning up. As my consciousness blurred, the squeaky broken window of the woodshed swung open, and a figure tumbled in. The person before me was covered in blood, wounds all over. When he spoke, his young voice was hoarse and desperate. "Save me." I forced myself up and let him hide under the stack of straw at my feet, spreading my skirt over it to cover him tightly. Not long after, several shadows landed silently, their blades stained with blood. They didn't want to make a commotion and left after failing to find their target. After a while, I moved aside to let him out, then took a dried lotus seed candy from my pocket. "For you. Eating candy will make the pain go away." He stared eerily at the candy for a while, then looked up at me. "You're Zhao Yanran." I shivered. Seeing the abnormal flush on my face, he taunted, "Are you going to meet him looking like this?" This little brat was infuriating. Enraged and humiliated, I glared fiercely at him. "What do you know?" He took the candy from my palm and climbed out the window without looking back. "If you want to die, then die." The Marquis of Wenchang had an upright demeanor throughout his life, yet he raised such a weak and useless daughter like you. Shame, despair, grief, and anger combined into a heavy hammer that struck me hard, and I wept bitterly, covering my face. From that day on, I never dared to think of seeking death again. 6 years passed, and I was now the courtesan of WanYue Pavilion. Men behind gold-engraved jade railings would spend extravagantly just to enjoy a brief moment with me. Xiao Che redeemed me with 10,000 taels of gold. In a robe of pale moonlight silk, he spoke gently with a modest demeanor, shedding all resemblance to the dark child from back then. He proposed a deal, asking if I was willing to enter the palace for revenge. 3 days later, I entered the palace. Emperor Xiao couldn't get enough of my charms, and soon after, he ennobled me as consort Xiao and allowed me to accompany him in the imperial study. Every time I served him, I hid a slow-acting poison in my mouth, taking the antidote beforehand. I played the role of a perfect seductress, working with Xiao Che, who operated both inside and outside, quietly consuming everything belonging to Emperor Xiao. Years passed, and Xiao Che's influence was unmatched. He visited the dying Emperor Xiao in the palace, dismissing the servants as he leisurely watched me pour the night soil into the emperor's mouth, choking him to death. Xiao Che naturally took the throne, and I was discreetly taken out of the palace, with the public being told I had died of a sudden illness. At that time, I was 20, the prime of my life, but my heart was dead. Xiao Che asked about my future plans. Having spent years in the palace, I knew many secrets. For instance, back when Xiao Che was a child, he pushed his birth mother, noble Lady Li, off a high platform to ingratiate himself with the childless yet powerful noble consort Wu. I also knew Emperor Zhao's obsession with immortality. To please him, Xiao Che collected the heart's blood of over 100 young girls from around the land, claiming it could keep the emperor youthful forever. With my great revenge achieved, I wanted nothing more to do with him. So, I lied about wishing to stay in the mansion and accompany my family's memorial tablets, while secretly hastening my preparations to leave the capital. Who knew he would be even more impatient? Late at night, I was knocked out by incense laced with narcotics. When I woke, I found myself in Changlu Hall, my name changed, and I had become his consort Xiao. I caused scenes, cursed, and even tried to threaten with death. In the end, I crawled at his feet and begged, "Please let me leave the palace." He held a lotus seed candy in his mouth and pulled me into his arms. No. I tried to escape several times, and he finally lost patience. In the dark room, the long whip in his hand looped twice around my neck, grinding his teeth as he asked if I had a heart. I helped you avenge your enemies, didn't mind your unchaste body, tolerated you in every way possible. What more do you want? I could barely breathe, uttering broken sentences. I want to leave the palace. He laughed in anger. I've spoiled you too much, making you so insolent. I'd like to see how you plan to escape from this palace. Changlu Hall became the cold palace where I was imprisoned. All the attendants were dismissed, leaving only someone to deliver a meal daily. In the middle of the night, a nightmare woke me up to find someone sitting behind me. I kicked out, only to have my ankle grabbed. Xiao Che bit down on my shoulder fiercely. I cried out in pain and pulled out the scissors I had hidden under my pillow to stab him. He effortlessly subdued me. A pain like breaking bones throbbed in my wrist as he mocked, "What, still thinking of killing me?" The curtains were yanked down roughly. He tied my hands up high and pounced on me. Ungrateful. My patience is at its end. Zhao Yin ran, "You deserve to be treated like this." Unable to resist, I collapsed like a dead fish, letting him do as he pleased, staring blankly at the large peony on the bedpost. My numbness must have angered him. He suddenly threw me back onto the bed, panting heavily. "I know exactly how you used to please that old man." "You think I don't know?" Years ago, during a hunt, Xiao Che was chasing a deer when he stumbled upon me in the deep forest, beneath Emperor Xiao. The gold bell on my ankle jingled with an ambiguous sound, announcing the spring scene through the thick branches. Swallowing my humiliation, I softly called out to His Majesty. Suddenly, a strong wind whizzed past above my head. With a clang, an arrow embedded itself in the tree behind me, leaving only a few inches of the feathered shaft exposed. Not far away, Xiao Che sat astride his horse, his unreadable gaze fixed on my foot clutching Emperor Zhao's waist. Amid Emperor Zhao's terrified cry, Xiao Che adopted a look of feigned fear, dismounted, and begged for forgiveness. As he recounted this old story, his eyes darkened. "Guess what I did after father died? I swapped his body and threw it into a snake pit. He forcefully turned my face. Your body can only belong to me. Heaven or earth, life or death, you cannot go anywhere without me. Heaven or earth, life or death." I suddenly felt a wave of despair. With the chill of spring in the air, covered in whip marks and thrown on the bed to freeze through the night, I developed a high fever. Half asleep and half awake, my chaotic memories painted my dreams in sepia tones. I saw my father lifting me high, placing me on his shoulders, and taking me to Fuyuan Grange to buy osmanthus cakes. I saw my grandmother scolding me for being so unruly that no one would dare marry me. My father pulled me up, covered in mud, with a stern face. "If no one marries her, then she won't marry. My daughter, I have the skills to protect her." Then, I saw guards from the palace suddenly arrive, taking him away in a grand array. He turned his head, still looking lovingly at me. "Be good, wait for Daddy to bring you osmanthus cake when I come back." Finally, I saw my father kneeling on the execution platform. He was tortured beyond recognition, but his back was still straight. Those bright eyes found his little daughter in the crowd instantly. He mouthed to me silently, "Yin Ran, don't look." In my sleep, tears soaked my temples as I sobbed, "Daddy. Daddy." A sudden chill on my back pulled me from my memories. Barely wiping away my tears, I turned around in fury. A man in a sleek shadow guard outfit, his hair tightly tied, revealing a sharp side profile, knelt by the bed, applying medicine to my wounds. After a moment of confusion, I realized that anyone appearing here now could only be someone sent by Xiao Che to watch over me. If he intended to torture me, he wouldn't just let me die. An unbearable embarrassment followed. I didn't know how much of my sorry state this shadow guard had witnessed. After untying my restraints, I moved my stiff wrists and buried my face in the damp pillow. After treating my wounds, the man brought a bowl of medicine. He watched me drink it before disappearing as quickly as he had come. Days later, my fever subsided, but I felt increasingly stifled. Changlu Hall was too quiet. Spring was in full swing, everything in harmony, yet it all had nothing to do with me. The loneliness was driving me mad. The shadow guard appeared daily for half a moment, treating my wounds with a cold face, then silently retreating into the shadows. In the vast palace, there were only two living beings, him and me. Having nothing else to do, I began trying to talk to him. Mostly, it was me prattling on, occasionally receiving a cold, clear, ice-shattering reply. Over these days, from his sparse words, I learned his name was Duan Linshao. Duan Linshao, come down here and talk to me. My neck is sore from looking up. My stomach growled suddenly. Duan Linshao, can you get me something to eat? The daily meals were bland and tasteless, like wind blowing past the ears after eating. In just over 20 days, my waist had become noticeably thinner, with the jade bracelet hanging loosely on my wrist. My face had also become thin and sharp. I coaxed, look, your job is to keep an eye on me. How will you explain yourself if I starve to death? Seeing him still silent, I suddenly stood up, pretending to faint. I'm feeling dizzy. Who would have thought that standing up too quickly would make my vision go black with a sudden heat, causing me to fall backward? A gust of wind blew, and Duan Linshao silently landed next to me, supporting me. Through the thin fabric, his solid, efficient arm pressed against my bony spine. My eyelids grew heavy, and the last thing I saw before losing consciousness was a pair of pitch-black eyes. I didn't know how long I had slept. When I woke up, I held my head and got up to drink water, finding 2 paper packages on the table. I felt them, they were still warm. Opening them revealed a golden roasted chicken and some pastries. I tore off a drumstick and stuffed it in my mouth but felt it was improper. I pulled it back out and held the drumstick, with some saliva on it, up to the air. Do you want some? No. Chewing on the drumstick, I tentatively said, let's make a deal. Don't tell Xiao Che about this. I just want to eat my fill. I can give you a lot of silver. I knew attempting to bribe a shadow guard with money was useless, but silver was all I could offer now. The shadow guard on the beam remained silent as always. No, never mind then. All right. Since then, there was always a plate of food next to the daily medicinal soup. After eating, I would place silver notes on the table. They would always return, untouched, to the dressing box the next day. I couldn't resist the constant help, so I invited him down to join me. When he remained silent, I'd pretend to faint again. Then, as he supported me, I'd swiftly grab his wrist. Eat with me. After a long standoff, he finally picked up a piece of pastry and quietly ate, standing by. The morning light fell obliquely, and outside the window, the pear trees bloomed like stacked clouds and piled snow, with occasional sounds of warbling orioles drifting in. The usually cold and lonely Changlu Hall had an inexplicable air of tranquility. Feeling at ease, I chatted about childhood stories while eating. I recounted seeing the young men at the spring banquet drinking and reciting poems, secretly noting it. The next day, when the teacher called to recite poetry, I mimicked those adults' carefree style and downed some stolen wine. Under everyone's shocked gaze, I opened my mouth and vomited all over Miss Chen in front of me. Miss Chen cried like it was the end of the world, and I apologized while retching. In the end, the teacher slapped my hand hard, and my father prepared generous gifts and took me to apologize at the Chen residence. I told of my greed during the new year, getting so round that the young master of the neighboring Li residence laughed at me like a pig, leading me and my cousin to chase him. When he had no way out, he hid in the dry toilet. We threw a string of firecrackers in, making a mess. Choking on his pastry, Duan Linshao coughed abruptly. I slapped him twice on the back. He covered his mouth. Cough cough, thank you, your grace. The war in Eastern Yi raged on, leaving Xiao Che too busy to bother me. Without his face around, I felt a bit relieved. Moreover, with Duan Linxiao's daily deliveries of food, I even gained some weight. He remained reticent, often pretending to nap on the beams when idle. On hot summer nights, waking from the heat, there was always a bit of coolness coming from behind. Turning my head, I'd see Duan Linxiao sitting on the floor by the couch, holding a fan in his hand. He was quite considerate. Once, he left without a word and returned a few nights later, drenched with moisture. I gazed at him sweetly. Duan Linxiao, I'm very hungry. Where did you go? He took a package out of his embrace and placed it on the table, on a mission. With my keen nose, despite his inconspicuous black shadow robes, I could still smell the blood. Are you hurt? He answered calmly, no. I searched for some leftover ointment. I'll apply medicine for you. As I approached, he backed away until he was cornered by the wall. My patience snapped. Turn around. Startled, he turned and faced the wall begrudgingly. Duan Linxiao was tall, so I applied the ointment to the knife wound on his back, then stood on tiptoe to blow on it gently. He suddenly froze, standing there like a block of wood. I muttered softly, going out without a word, leaving me to look for you everywhere. The next morning, he stood by my bed, waking me from my sleep. I'm going to get the food, I'll be right back. I blinked at him sleepily. So, your grace won't have to look for me everywhere. From then on, he would always tell me beforehand every time he went out. Like a normal husband bidding farewell to his wife before leaving, I'm heading out, we'll be back a bit later. I shook my head, dismissing the strange idea that popped into my mind. That summer was unusually short, with just a few hot days. After 2 rains, the cicadas' chirping dwindled to only a few sporadic sounds. Lying on the couch, listening to the pattering rain, the fresh, sweet air with a touch of moisture drifted in through the half-opened window. The osmanthus bloomed so early this year. Early the next morning, the weather cleared. I couldn't wait to go to the courtyard and tiptoe to pick the petals into a basket. Washing the flowers and spreading them on bamboo mats to dry, they would be ready to make osmanthus cakes the next day. Duan Linxiao stood by the doorframe, arms crossed, silently watching me for a while. Suddenly, he moved as light as the wind, landing gracefully on the treetop. Clear sword light swept through the branches, and instantly, it rained flowers. In what should have been a romantic scene with the air filled with fragrance and falling blooms like snow, the osmanthus trees, having been soaked overnight, now showered me with petals and rainwater. Caught off guard while picking flowers, I was thoroughly drenched. Seeing red, I stomped my feet and spat out the rainwater. Tui, you fool. Awkwardly frozen for a moment, he landed in front of me, using his sleeve to wipe the droplets off my cheeks. Forgive me, your grace. I went inside to change clothes and came back out to dry my hair. Seeing Duan Linxiao's tall, handsome figure standing under the tree picking flowers, blowing off the droplets, and carefully placing them in a small basket on his elbow. He looked every bit the picture of a dutiful wife. I burst out laughing. He turned at the sound and, seeing me laugh at him, a faint blush crept up his ears, and he hurriedly turned to put on his mask. Duan Linxiao, why are you blushing? The mask covered half his face, revealing only his black eyes. His voice was calm, flower rash. Liar! I lifted my skirt and ran towards him, the moon-white hem fluttering like wings. Perhaps the sun was too intense, melting the cold edge of his features into a gentle smile. He hesitated, then curved his lips into a slight grin. Xiao Che arrived at the Changlu Hall the following day. I spent a few hours in the small kitchen and finally managed to make some presentable pastries. Arranging the pastries on the prettiest glazed plate I had, I suppressed the inexplicable excitement in my chest and slowly walked back while holding them. Just as I was about to call Duan Linxiao to come down and eat, the door was pushed open without any warning, and Xiao Che strode in with haste. He crossed the threshold with hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the room before landing on the plate of osmanthus cakes. He let out a slight snort. You certainly have the leisure for this. Feeling better? I didn't bother to verbally spar with him and turned around without looking at him. What brings your majesty here? His eyes darkened. Every time you see me, it's the same attitude. Seeing that I didn't respond, he sat by the table and reached for the osmanthus cakes. Did you make these oddly shaped things by hand? I slapped his hand away heavily and shielded the pastries behind me. If your majesty wants cakes, just summon the palace chefs. My humble skills are unworthy of your golden palate. He looked down at the red mark on the back of his hand, his briefly softened expression hardening again. Consort Xiao, playing hard to get should have its limits. Haven't you understood anything after I've left you alone for so long? His words were ridiculous, and I couldn't help but mock back. Your majesty, even self-indulgence should have its limits. To others, you may be the high and mighty emperor, but to me, you're nothing. Xiao Che kicked the table over with one foot, gripping my neck and pinning me against the wall. Insolent! Such crude words and behavior, do you have any semblance of a consort? Without me, you would still be a prostitute selling smiles at the door. Do you know how many petitions requesting your death I intercept daily? Were it not for my intervention, you wouldn't be standing here defying me now. Choked till my face turned red, I forced a grim smile. Your majesty must have heard the saying, a prostitute has no affection, an actor has no loyalty, right? If you think I'm unworthy, just kill me now. Gritting his teeth, he growled, Zhao Yanran, you're crazy. Their family, one of them murdered loyal officials, causing my family to be destroyed. The other is heartless and hypocritical, locking away my freedom for life. They are the ones who are crazy, this world is crazy. As the air in my chest ran out and I was about to lose consciousness, Steward Duan's trembling voice came from outside the door. Your Majesty, General of the Pacifying West has entered the palace and is waiting in the imperial study. Xiao Che suppressed his rage and flung me to the ground. I will go immediately. The heavy sound of the lock closing echoed in the room. Sitting amidst the mess, I buried my face in my knees. A gentle sigh reached my ears, and Duan Linxiao lifted me onto the bed, carefully picking up the scattered pieces of osmanthus cake one by one. My voice was hoarse and unpleasant. It's dirty now, don't pick them up. He raised his head and put the cake pieces into his mouth. After a moment, he said, Don't talk about yourself like that. Stunned, I asked, What? It's not your fault, Your Grace. That night, Duan Linxiao carried the drunken me up to the rooftop. The moonlight flowed, and the stars twinkled. Petals twirled up, only to drift down again. Flushed with alcohol, I squinted slightly, propping my chin in my hand and teasing him, You are indeed handsome, come closer so I can take a good look. He looked at the sky, at the ground, at the lush grass and trees below the courtyard wall. I leaned over, teasing him further. Duan Linxiao, why are you so shy for a grown man? Suddenly, our eyes met, breaths mingling, his face close at hand. Something in my heart sprouted quietly. My throat suddenly felt dry, and I retreated hastily, but my legs weakened, and I fell into his arms. Looking down at me, his eyes shimmering. My face burned. Stammering, I said, impertinent. Stop staring at me. This subordinate dares not. Though he said he dared not, his gaze did not waver. Unable to withstand it, I felt like I might drown in those deep pools. Close your eyes. Close them. A smile danced in his eyes as he extended his long fingers behind his head, slowly pulling down the hairband and covering his eyes. I'll do whatever you say, Your Grace. A firework exploded in my mind. Driven by some heavenly impulse, I brazenly reached out. He lowered his head slightly, obediently allowing my liquor-stained fingertips to trace his straight nose, sharp jaw, leaving a trail of water where they passed. Finally stopping on those lips, as smooth as jade. Cold. So cold that I instantly sobered up. I had thought I would spend the rest of my days alone in this palace, wilting away in solitude. But he came in the night and planted a flower in the barren land of my heart. He is good. Should not fall into ruin with me. Clumsily, I crawled out of his embrace. I'm drunk, let's go back. He sat stiffly for a moment, then pulled down the hairband, eyes half-lidded without revealing emotion. All right. Our interactions the next day were no different. He remained reticent, I remained talkative. It was as if that absurd night had been just a dream. But something had taken root in my heart, wild and fierce. As the festival approached, Xiao Che came to the Changlu Hall and lifted my confinement. Duan Linshao was also reassigned. He didn't say goodbye. I was a bit unhappy. He had promised to say something when he left. I weighed the snowball in my hand. When he returns, I must stuff it into his collar. Then again, what if he catches a cold? When he returns, I'll have him build a 7-foot snowman, and I might forgive him. I sat in the corridor waiting for him, but he never returned even after the snowball in my hand melted into a puddle. Though the silver charcoal burned brightly in the Changlu Hall, I still felt cold. The hall had always been cold. Only when he was here did it feel slightly warm. I stood at the palace gate, watching the eunuchs and palace maids coming and going on the bluestone path, carrying boxes past me. They bowed their heads in respect and hurriedly left. Occasionally, I could hear faint singing for the rehearsal of the performance for the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet. It was bustling, but it had nothing to do with me. Tomorrow is the birthday banquet, and I don't need to attend. When noble consort Wu and I were both concubines, she despised me. Now that she has become the Empress Dowager, she regards me as a thorn in her eye. She said, "A courtesan, the sight of you disgusts me." Only Duan Linshao would tell me that it was not my fault. What is he doing now? The severe winter cold, executing tasks in those thin clothes, he must be very cold. I swallowed my bitterness and muttered, "Duan Linshao. I'm here." I turned back joyfully. He stood quietly in front of me, with snow resting undissolved on his shoulders. Just like countless days and nights before, he would climb high onto the beams, and I would lie on the couch. I talk, and he listens. The night was deep, but outside it was still noisy and bustling, with the sharp scolding of eunuchs ringing out occasionally. Suddenly, I became curious. "Do you remember your birthday?" Duan Linshao shook his head. Of course, shadow guards cannot have vulnerabilities, they are all chosen from orphans. How could they remember such trivial things? Then, no day is better than today. Today is your birthday. I thought for a long time about what I could give him. I initially wanted to give him a sachet or a sword tassel, but my handiwork is too clumsy. Thinking it over, I got up and took out the pipa that I hadn't used for a long time. I plucked the strings, and the clear and crisp melody flowed from my fingertips. "Seeing you sit and walk. It feels like my body is on fire." I greedily sketched his brows and eyes, carving them deep into my heart. When the song ended, Duan Linshao was silent for a long time, then walked towards me. He took a small pearl flower from my hair, grasping it tightly in his hand, his eyes brimming with faint sorrow. "I'll accept the birthday gift from your grace. Tomorrow, I also have a gift for your grace." I smiled and consented, but in my heart, I knew this was farewell. It wasn't until the box I was hiding in was opened in the dense forest outside the capital. Today, the opera troupe performing for the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet was led by Lu Ruyen, my best friend from WanYue Pavilion. Before entering the palace, I asked Xiao Che for money to redeem her freedom, thinking we would never have the chance to meet again. Until I followed the singing that day, and we met again, gazing at each other. Hearing about my ordeals over the years, she cursed in a low voice. "That dog of an emperor is truly despicable, worse than the clients at WanYue Pavilion." She immediately decided to help me escape from the palace. On the day of the birthday banquet, the crowd was vast and chaotic. Surrounded by groups of people passing by, no one noticed me disguised as a palace maid. I lowered my head and blended into the crowd, quickly heading to the room where the opera troupe stored their props. Before long, I heard the sound of a lock, and the box I was hiding in shook and was placed onto a carriage. I suddenly thought of Duan Linshao's inexplicably sorrowful eyes under the flickering candlelight last night. What will he feel when he realizes I'm gone? Lu Ruyen cautiously looked around, handed me the reins, and tied a thick cloak around me. She wiped her tears. "Go quickly." I solemnly thanked her, then whipped the horse hard without hesitation, and it sped off like lightning. The wind and snow, the palace, the capital, all were left far behind me. And also Duan Linshao. Duan Linshao was still in the palace, but I was not a bird in a cage. After running through the wind and snow all night, I finally reached the foothills of Yao Mountain. I was stiff and cold, rubbed my frostbitten face, and pulled out a dry biscuit to sate my hunger. The winding path stretched towards the steep mountains. Crossing the mountains in such weather is risky, but I cannot stay here. I only have one chance. If I get caught and sent back, I dare not imagine what awaits me. I tucked the remaining biscuit into my jacket, breathed warm air onto my hands, and whipped the horse hard. Suddenly, several cold arrows flew out without warning and nailed to the ground in front of me, blocking my path. The horse was startled, rearing up high with a whinny. I tightly held the reins, struggled but was thrown off. The breath I had held for many years dispersed at that moment. I suddenly felt exhausted. Lying there waiting to be captured, but there was no movement. I sat up, patted the snow off me, and laughed bitterly. Are you leaving or not? My heart grew colder bit by bit. In the wind and snow, that black-clad figure was particularly striking. Duan Linshao held a bow in his hand, with 2 other shadow guards standing behind him. I rubbed my eyes. It must be the heavy wind and snow. Or maybe I had hit my head. How could it be? How could it be? But those eyes were looking at me just as before. Only now, they were colder than the snow beneath me. I choked back the metallic taste of blood and spoke with difficulty. How did you find me? Such heavy snow should have wiped out the horse's tracks in no time. Your Grace once mentioned yearning for H City. This is the only route to pass through. So it was. So this was his gift. Like my heart was breaking, a mouthful of blood spurted out. I grinned with my blood-red mouth and laughed heartily. Duan Linshao, well done. He pulled out an arrow from behind him and set it on the bowstring, pointing the sharp tip directly at me. My heart turned to ashes, and I stumbled, step by step, walking towards him. The hands that once fanned me and lit my lamps now unhesitatingly drew the bowstring tight. By the Empress Dowager's decree, Consort Xiao has fled the palace and is to be executed on the spot to uphold the palace rules. My name is Lu Qingyao. According to Lu Ruyan, I was found in the snow. I slept for half a month before waking up one day to her worried face. Miss, I think I have seen you before, I said, feeling a strange familiarity. She was stunned and asked if I remembered who I was. I shook my head. She sighed and murmured to herself, fate is truly unpredictable. She let me stay in the Lu family troupe and named me Lu Qingyao. She said I was unlucky looking and inept, so she assigned me to work backstage, and I even had to cover my face with a veil when going out. I began to doubt my face. Was I really that frightening? Sometimes she would cautiously ask, Qingyao, do you remember anything from the past? I shook my head. Every time I tried to recall, my mind went blank as if someone had deliberately erased my memory. When I tried to think deeply, an intense pain would break the chain of thoughts. My amnesia didn't bother me much. From what she said, I was found severely injured, hovering between life and death. My life must have been miserable before. Why would I want to recall such misery and make myself unhappy? The Lu family troupe's performances were excellent but never stayed in one place for long. We had been in Y City for 2 months and were set to leave the next day. That night, as I packed my belongings in the room, my hesitation caught Lu Ruyan's attention. She glanced at me. If you have something to say, just say it. I carefully chose my words. Ruyan, did you steal someone's man and are now being hunted? Lu Ruyan was furious and immediately pinched my face. You're spouting nonsense. I covered my face, aggrieved. If you aren't being chased, why are we always on the move? In one place, you can make a name for yourself. She scolded me. What do you know? After a pause, she added, you'll like it there. I puckered my lips. How do you know? Her tone suddenly became serious. Someone told me. Curious, I asked, who? The god. Crazy. Our next stop was H City. Entering the city amid a light drizzle, the simple pleasure boats swayed on the Jade River. The boatmen sang songs I couldn't understand. Delicate ladies walked under eaves with black tiles, raindrops falling onto their oil paper umbrellas. I lifted the curtain of the carriage, looking at the tranquil scene, feeling inexplicably at peace. The god was right, I really liked it here. H City was wealthy and bustling. Once the Lu family troupe settled in, people came to watch the performances in an endless stream, and silver flowed into Lu Ruyan's pockets like water. She was so pleased that she gave us extra wages for the month, and I joyfully dragged her to buy osmanthus cakes. Lu Ruyan, busy calculating with her abacus, waved me away without looking up. Go away, I'm busy. I left the cake shop, holding the steaming osmanthus cakes, happily unwrapping the paper. Just as I was about to take a sniff under my veil, someone bumped into me, sending the cakes flying. I reached out to pick them up, but a few stray cats came out of nowhere and ran off with them. These pastries were delicate and expensive. Earning little, I lived frugally. It was rare to treat myself, and now it was all wasted. Fuming, I grabbed the person's sleeve. Are you in such a hurry to drown? Pay me back. The person wore simple clothes but stood elegantly. When he spoke, his voice was as clear as mountain spring water. I didn't mean to bump into you. Please forgive me. He searched his pockets, looking slightly embarrassed. I'm really sorry. I left in a hurry today and forgot to bring money. How about I write you an IOU? Having been with Lu Ruyen for 2 years, I was somewhat influenced by her. Thinking of the wasted 2 silver, I glared and couldn't help but curse. Nonsense. If you leave, where will I find you? Are you trying to trick me? The man was taken aback but then smiled deeper, continuing to apologize sincerely. I scanned him up and down, finding nothing of value, but his attitude was genuinely earnest. I let go, impatiently. Just go. I'll consider it my bad luck. He insisted on borrowing paper and pen from a nearby shop, writing an IOU. May I ask for your name and address so I can find you later? Rolling my eyes, I replied, I'm Lu Qingyao. I live in the Lu family troupe. He finished writing, handed me the IOU, and said, I'm Fui Chen. I sternly took the IOU. You better pay it back. He smiled and bade farewell. However, 7 days passed without him showing up. Whenever I saw the IOU, I cursed him in my heart but had no choice but to accept my bad luck. One evening while cleaning a spear backstage, a servant came running. Qingyao, a guest is looking for you, waiting in a second-floor private room. In the private room, several servants stood aside. The figure was hidden behind layers of curtains, not visible. I placed the tea tray down and respectfully asked, May I know why the guest is looking for me? The curtains were lifted, revealing a familiar face. It was that man from the other day. Miss, we meet again. Fui Chen got up and walked towards me. The gold-threaded bamboo pattern on his sleeves shimmered under the light, and his jade hairpin gleamed flawlessly, a stark contrast to his appearance the other day. I instantly realized the situation and knelt down with a loud thud. In H City, aristocratic families are numerous, and a flick of their fingers could crush us ants. I bowed my head to the ground. I was blind and unintentionally offended you that day, my lord. Please, take your anger out on me alone, and spare the Lu family troupe. Fui Chen looked down at me for a moment, then gently helped me up. You misunderstood. I came to return your money. With that, he placed a heavy pouch into my hand. I weighed it, completely bewildered, and quickly tried to return it with a smile. I dare not accept this. It's enough that you aren't angry with me. You truly are a kind man. He seemed amused by my words, placed the pouch on the table, then turned and sat back down. It's fine, you may go. As I bowed and retreated towards the door, I tripped over something and fell backward unexpectedly. In a flash, Fui Chen jumped over the long table to catch me, inadvertently pulling down my veil. The next day, Fui Chen sent his steward over, specifically requesting to take me to the Fu residence. I was stunned. Didn't he say yesterday there was nothing to worry about? I peeked out from behind the curtain, watching Lu Ruyen handle the situation with the steward. Lu Ruyen personally served tea to the steward, speaking in a flattering tone. My younger sister has been lazy and ignorant since childhood. She knows nothing about performing. What if she frightens Lord Fu? If Lord Fu wants to hear a play, just send a message, and I will personally come to your residence to sing. No need to trouble you to come here. The steward sat comfortably in the chair, scraping the tea lid with his fingers, his expression kind. You jest, Master Lu. Qingyao has her own merits. Then he leaned forward and whispered something that made Lu Ruyen's face turn pale. Not wanting her to be put in a difficult position, I lifted the curtain and stepped out. I'll go with you. Lu Ruyen turned to me with a complex expression. The steward respectfully said, "Please, follow me, miss." Inside the Fu residence, a maid led me to the main hall before leaving. I sat nervously on a rosewood chair, eyes darting around to take in my surroundings. Ah, how wealthy. After a short while, Fu Chen appeared from behind the screen, carrying a plate of osmanthus cakes, smiling as he approached me. I stood up quickly. Lord Fu. He placed the osmanthus cakes on the small side table beside me. Have a seat. Still annoyed by this morning's events, I kept my expression neutral, asking sincerely, "Why did you summon me today, Lord Fu?" He sat beside me, a faint fragrance reaching my nose. "Last time, I accidentally knocked over your osmanthus cakes. I happened to pass by and bought some today, so I invited you to try them." I bit my lip and softly said, "Since you invited me, I could not refuse. Just please don't trouble the Liu family troupe." He stared at me for a moment, then sighed softly. "You look very much like an old acquaintance of mine." Except she always looked lifeless, unlike your vibrant self. Not understanding his meaning, I responded cautiously, "Perhaps something bad happened to her." He suddenly leaned toward me, the fragrance around him intensifying. "Qing Yao, do you think if I treated her better, she would forgive me?" I scratched my head and subtly shifted away, keeping a steady smile. With sincerity, one can move even the hardest of hearts. She likely would. From then on, he had someone bring me to the Fu residence daily, sending me back after dusk. There was always a plate of osmanthus cakes on the table, and a puppy to play with in the courtyard. He personally set up a swing under a tree, adorning the rope with 2 beautiful wisteria vines. Fu Chen was often busy in the study, but during his free time, he would sit on the stone bench under the tree, watching me play with the puppy, smiling warmly. When I got tired, he would beckon me over. He'd wipe the sweat from my forehead with a handkerchief, then offer me a bowl of chilled sweet soup. He was always proper and gentle, never crossing any boundaries, just like a considerate elder brother. Gradually, I let down my guard but remained puzzled about his intentions. I asked him why he treated me so well. Was it because I resembled his old acquaintance? He smiled and shook his head without explaining. However, Lu Rian's brows were always furrowed with worry. She never mentioned leaving H City again. When I asked her what was wrong, she excused it by saying the Liu family troupe had been too busy lately. From early spring to late summer, one day, unexpectedly, he didn't send anyone to fetch me. Before bed, I suddenly thought of the scent from the sachet at his waist, feeling an itch deep in my heart. An unusual feeling sprouted suddenly and spread rapidly, growing into a towering tree. Fu Chen began to invade my dreams, with an irresistible allure, always tantalizing but just out of reach. It wasn't until half a month later, when he unexpectedly came to the Liu family troupe himself to fetch me. In the enclosed carriage, with him so near, the familiar fragrance filled my nose, and I closed my eyes in comfort, letting out a small sigh. But it wasn't enough, still not enough. The inexplicable craving these past days had not lessened, but intensified. A strange sensation rose from my lower abdomen, flowed through my chest, up my neck, leaving a trail of pink warmth. Though my mind was clear, I was helpless, anxiously pulling at my collar, searching for relief. Until this familiar face overlapped with the one in my dream, it dawned on me that he was the source of my unease. I have feelings for him? I'm craving for him? He looked at me with concern, his hands properly placed on his knees. Qing Yao, are you feeling unwell? Speaking thus, he even shifted away a bit like a gentleman. The fragrance suddenly receded, leaving me hollow. In panic, I threw my arms around his waist. Fu Chen's clothes remained impeccable. He looked down at me, my neckline slightly open, unfazed. What are you doing, Qing Yao? I am but your elder brother. My face flushed deeply, biting my lip, I silently climbed onto his shoulder, answering with actions. Finally satisfied, he let out a light laugh, leaned down to kiss me, and wrapped a cloak around us, carrying me into the mansion under watching eyes. Since that day, the servants at the Fu residence changed the way they addressed me. Fu Chen was always kind and gentle, never said a harsh word to me. And I became increasingly dependent on him, restless if I didn't see him for half a day, searching for him everywhere. Only being held in his embrace, smelling the familiar scent on him, could I slightly calm down. I once curiously asked him what kind of spices were in the sachet he carried that smelled so good. He lowered his head and kissed me gently, just common spices. If Qingyao likes it, I'll carry it every day. The Fu residence was large, so large that I got lost one afternoon while looking for him. Deep in the dense bamboo forest, there was a house I had never seen before. I leaned against the door and listened for a while, but heard nothing. So, I tentatively pushed the door open. There were no candles lit inside. Only a few beams of light streamed in through a small, high window. By the dim light, I saw that the room was filled with instruments of torture. Looking further in, I could barely see a shadow of someone, hands and feet bound to a torture rack. The faint smell of blood pervaded the air, making my heart race with a pang of fear. I quickly turned to leave but collided head-on with Fu Yichen, who had appeared behind me. Startled, I wanted to explain, but when I met his gaze, the words stuck in my throat. On Fu Yichen's pale face were dots of blood that had not yet dried. He smiled at me as if he didn't notice, the same kind smile as always, but it made my scalp tingle. I swallowed and said with a dry voice, "I was looking for you, got lost, and ended up here by accident. I'll leave now." I tried to squeeze past him, but he grabbed my wrist. "Qingyao, don't be afraid." His warm breath brushed my ear, his eyes glimmering with a strange excitement. "I want to show you something." A sudden fear gripped me, and I tried to pull away. "I don't want to see it. I want to leave." He ignored my words, half coaxing and half dragging me toward the shadowy figure until I saw the person's face clearly. The man, bound to the torture rack, had his head hanging, hiding his eyes. His body was covered in marks of torture, with a gruesome scar on his shoulder, as if it had been cut open and healed repeatedly. In the middle of the scar was a small pink bead flower. I slowly touched my own shoulder. There was a scar there too. Suddenly, something was placed in my hand. I looked down to see a blood-stained whip. Fu Yichen whispered in my ear like a demon, "Qingyao, he stole something of mine. Help me." I shook my head frantically, resisting with my hand, but Fu Yichen forcefully raised it. The whip made a sharp crack in the air, striking heavily against the man. Warm liquid splashed onto the corner of my eye, sliding down my cheek like tears of blood. The man silently endured it, his dark eyes quietly watching me. A sharp pain pierced my heart like needles, causing a dull ache. In a flash, those eyes overlapped with fragmented memories in my mind, and unfamiliar scenes appeared briefly. In the clear moonlight, someone gazed at me with eyes sparkling, a flower petal on their brow. The intense pain overwhelmed me, and I fell to the ground, holding my head in weakness. Fu Yichen leaned down to gently wipe the blood from my face, seeming pleased. "Qingyao, don't be afraid. I would never treat you like this." With that, he picked me up horizontally, kissing me inch by inch in front of the man. From then on, we never spoke of that day again. But I became silent and listless, unable to find joy in anything. In the morning, as I combed my hair in front of the mirror, I would space out halfway through. After sitting motionless for an hour, I was startled to see the vacant puppet-like person in the mirror. I recalled how Fu Yichen had mentioned an old friend, whose eyes always looked dead. Now, I looked no different from that person. The fragrance on Fu Yichen became stronger, and he stayed closer to me. One idle afternoon in the study, he held my hand and wrote harmony for 100 years, together until old age on a piece of red and gold paper. His eyes were full of deep feelings. "Qingyao, let's get married." I nestled obediently into his arms. Okay. The news of the young master of the Fu family marrying a servant spread through each city, an extremely inappropriate match. On the day of the marriage proposal, the procession was grand, with carriages of gifts lined from the gate to the end of the street, attracting all the townspeople. Housekeeper Chu read the long list of gifts, and Lu Ruyen looked at the courtyard filled with vermilion lacquered chests. Though she loved wealth, she showed no joy. She pulled me inside, her eyes filled with emotions I couldn't comprehend. "Qingyao, are you really going to marry him? Have you fallen in love with him?" I felt a bit confused. I suppose I should love him. I couldn't leave him, I needed to be with him every day. Isn't that love? Lu Ruyen's expression grew more conflicted, then she suddenly grasped my hand, her gaze firm and resolute. "I have something to tell you." With a loud bang, the door was forcefully pushed open, and Fu Yichen stood outside, a flash of coldness in his eyes. He smiled and took my hand. "Why is Qingyao here?" "The betrothal gifts have arrived. Go see if you like them." Chu, check the gift list with Master Lu. Late at night, I was awakened by faint screams coming from outside the residence. The sound was desperate and mournful, sharp and piercing, echoing in the night but unclear. "Don't trust him, don't trust him, you've been deceived by him. He is," midline horizontal ellipsis. The shouting abruptly stopped, and a sudden panic overwhelmed me. I got up, threw on a robe, and went to the door. Fu Yichen entered just then, wrapping his arms around me to calm me down. "Did the noise wake you up?" A madman was causing a ruckus outside, probably drunk. I sent someone to check on him. He suddenly became silent, so he must have been taken away by the night patrol. I stubbornly pushed him away. "I want to see it myself." He didn't stop me, following closely behind. I circled the Fu residence but found nothing. A few days later, I went to the theater troupe to find Lu Ruyen, but she was nowhere to be seen. I asked a servant, who looked at me hesitantly. "The troop leader has returned home to visit relatives." Visit relatives? Lu Ruyen had never mentioned her family before, and even if she was visiting relatives, she wouldn't leave without informing me. I didn't believe it, so I asked others, but got the same answer. Fu Yichen was practicing calligraphy in the study when he heard about it. He was surprised. He put down his brush and held me in his arms. Perhaps troop leader Lu had an urgent matter at home, so she left in a hurry. "I will send someone to check on it. If there's any news, please tell me immediately." "Okay." A month later, I received a letter from Lu Ruyen. Fu Yichen was peeling walnuts for me. What did troop leader Lu say? I read the letter twice, recognizing her handwriting but still in disbelief. Lu Ruyen has gone back home to get married. She won't be coming back. Fu Yichen comforted me. It's hard for a woman to make a living away from home. Having someone who cares for her is a good thing. He then stuffed a walnut kernel into my mouth and pinched my cheek. "You're about to be a bride too. Don't overthink it. Is your wedding dress ready?" I shook my head in frustration. "I don't know how to sew." "I was thinking of hiring a seamstress to teach me." "Then you don't need to sew it. I'll have someone prepare it for you." I quickly refused. "No, the wedding dress must be sewn by the bride herself. It's not right to ask someone else to do it." I had no talent for needlework, and my fingers were pricked countless times before I managed to complete the dress just in time for the wedding. In 2 days, it would be the day of my and Fu Yichen's wedding. Late at night, I knocked on the door of his study. He was poring over something with a furrowed brow. When he saw me in a red dress, he was stunned. "Qingyao, why are you wearing the wedding dress now?" I twirled around. "Do I look good?" His gaze softened. "Yes, you look beautiful." I nestled into his arms, rubbing my cheek against his chin. "I'm so nervous." He lowered his eyes and kissed my forehead. "What are you nervous about?" "I've never been married before. I'm afraid I'll make a fool of myself on the wedding day." I tugged at his sleeve. "Practice with me once, will you?" Fu Yichen never refused my requests. He leaned back and spoke gently. "All right, how does my Qingyao want to practice?" Blushing, I slid my fingers down his chest and hooked onto his waistband. His eyebrows raised, watching me teasingly. He let me pull him up and led him to the already decorated bridal chamber. I opened the door, lit the dragon and phoenix candles, and the room was filled with red celebratory decorations. I put the wedding veil on my head, and he cooperatively lifted the veil with a wedding scale, full of affection. "My wife is truly beautiful." I picked up the wine cups for the wedding toast, and we drank together. Then I reached for his waistband. He gently caught my hand, his voice hoarse with restraint. "Qingyao, this is not appropriate. You must be patient." I broke free from his hand, pushed him to the bed, and climbed on top of him. "I've been patient for too long. I don't want to wait anymore." His eyes darkened with desire, and he let me pull down the bed curtains and tie his hands to the headboard. He chuckled. "Honey, you're becoming more mischievous." I didn't say anything, just sat by the bed watching his face turn pale. From pleasure to pain, from confusion to clarity. Finally, he coughed up blood. A dagger in my hand glinted coldly as it moved over his body, pondering where to stab. "Fui Chen, no." Xiao Che stared at me for a long time. "You poisoned the wine." The sachet was lifted by the dagger and thrown to the ground. "Didn't you drug me too?" I leaned close to his ear. "I've thought about it for a long time, wondering how to kill a despicable person like you in the most satisfying way, but I don't have that much time to waste on you." He smirked. "For Lu Ruyen, or for Duan Linshao?" I laughed too, pressing the dagger to his throat. "Both." "Speak honestly, and I'll let you die quickly." He adjusted to a comfortable position, not beating around the bush. "Initially, I never suspected Duan Linshao. I thought he had followed the Empress Dowager's orders and killed you. The royal guards are all implanted with a poison, loyal to the royal family for life. Any betrayal, and the poison will be triggered." He spoke proudly. "In other words, from the moment he chose to help you fake your death, he was doomed." My mind buzzed, recalling his sorrowful eyes the night we parted. He said he had a gift for me tomorrow. Sacrificing his life for my freedom. I staggered, gasping for breath. He grew increasingly pleased and continued speaking to himself. "In front of others, he pretended to kill you with an arrow. Then, under the pretext of handling your corpse, he used medicine to erase your memory and entrusted you to Lu Ruyen. The poison acted as expected. He endured severe heart-wrenching pain for half a year until during a task, his condition finally gave him away. I had him captured and found that pearl hairpin, realizing then that he had such unspeakable thoughts about my woman. Only then did I suspect you hadn't died at all." Xiao Che coughed up a mouthful of blood, his eyes wild with madness. "Since he cared so much about you, how could I, being so benevolent, not fulfill his wish? I pinned that pearl hairpin onto him, so he could see it every day." Suppressing the tremor in my voice, I asked, "Then how did he get the same wound on his shoulder as me?" With his face full of mockery, he replied, "This is even more amusing. He was a secret guard who climbed out of a pile of dead bodies and injured himself with an arrow to atone for his sin." "You really are a disaster. Within a year, you seduced him so much that he was willing to betray his master and die for you. And then there's Lu Ruyen. I gave her a chance, but she insisted on causing a scene outside, disrupting my plans. Neither of them deserves to live." With a forceful push, the dagger in my hand pressed a blood trail on Xiao Che's neck. Xiao Che seemed unaware, his voice growing hysterical. His mouth was incredibly tight-lipped. "He endured dozens of punishments, but never disclosed your whereabouts. I even neglected my imperial duties, leaving the palace overnight to search for you. I love you so much. Why do you insist on breaking my heart? Have I not treated you well these days? Haven't you fallen in love with me too?" I wavered my finger at him, showing the faint blue marks from needle pricks under my fingernails. The palace doctor once said it was due to kidney deficiency. However, the seamstress who taught me to embroider wedding dresses had a family that dealt in spices and identified the blue tint as long-term exposure to a certain fragrance called heartbreak, which can control one's mind and spirit, turning them into a soulless puppet over time. I have seen love. And that is not love. Without hesitation, I thrust the dagger downward into his abdomen and stood up to leave. Blood gushed from his mouth, his voice choking intermittently. "Don't go, don't go. You belong to me. I bought you back then." Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted calligraphy hanging on the wall with gold-streaked red paper that read "A harmonious marriage till old age." Resolutely, I tore the calligraphy down and, meeting his despairing gaze, ignited it with a candle. I shed my wedding dress, blending my plain white dress with the snowy landscape, and started running under the silent moonlight as flames rose behind me. My Duan Linshao is waiting for me at the end of this path. Dark shadows multiplied on either side, emerging like specters from the twilight, unleashing a barrage of willow leaf darts. There was no escape. I had no choice but to grit my teeth and run forward. At this point, I knew my fate. But at least, let me see him one more time. Suddenly, the sound of countless metal clashes rang behind me. The darts were intercepted midair and fell to the ground with clinking sounds. In the freezing, dead of winter, the once jade-like youth's face was now ghostly pale, dragging a piece of broken chain as he strode through the snow, shirtless. The world seemed to fall silent, and all I could hear was my heart pounding like a drum. Step by step, he walked towards me, frost spreading from the center of his chest. That was a sign of the poison acting up. Pain ripped through my heart like a knife, and tears fell unchecked, only to be caught by his outstretched hand. His eyes were filled with love. "Don't be afraid, I'm here." His voice was as light as a butterfly's wing, fragile enough to fly away at any second. He carried me on his back, wrapped the chain around his hand twice, and engaged in battle with the endless shadows. The sounds of flesh tearing, weapons clashing, and agonized screams filled the air. Leaning against his broad shoulder, I could feel his body growing colder under my touch, filling me with despair. Frost crept up his neck, and he let out a low groan, his movements growing quicker and more fluid, using up his life to carve a path for me. Until the last shadow fell. We sat in the snow, exhausted. He leaned gently against my shoulder, his voice barely a whisper. "That night, the moonlight was just like this, and you were drunk." I tried to smile. "Yes, I couldn't resist your beauty and wanted to take advantage of you." He also gave a rare smile, serene and kind. Pausing, he let his fingers rest on the curve of my shoulder, gently stroking. "I'm sorry I hurt you back then. It was me who ruined his entire life." Yet now, he apologized to me. Holding his cold body close, tears silently streamed down my face. "Duan Lin Xiao, are you cold?" The always stoic and restrained secret guard's voice suddenly sounded vulnerable. "Yes, please warm me." He reached to untie the ribbon from his hair, his dark eyes looking at me as they had back then. Blocking out his gaze with the ribbon, I lowered my head to kiss his pale lips. After a moment, I got up and teased him. "Duan Lin Xiao, your lips are so soft." He leaned against me silently, likely asleep. Blood stained the snow beneath us bright red. I was so tired too. I wanted to sleep. As my eyelids grew heavy, in my blur vision, the young man with ink-black hair, dressed in dark clothing, stood stoically. Responding to my call, he turned and walked towards me, taking my hand. Such a short life, like fire in the stone, a dream within a dream. All that was disappointing in the world, only you fulfilled my wishes.